The night my husband disappeared, the house still smelled like antiseptic and lilies. It's a haunting combination, the sharp chemical sting of a hospital ward mixed with the cloying, heavy scent of a funeral home. The flowers were from the members of our church. I remember looking at the cards, the handwriting neat and filled with a generic kind of hope. "For your recovery," the card said. But they didn't mean mine. They meant his. I had given him my kidney exactly 3 weeks earlier. The doctors had stood over my hospital bed with a kind of awe in their voices, calling it a miracle match. They spoke about rare compatibility and perfect biological harmony. They said it was almost as if we were made for each other, two halves of a single, functioning whole. I believed them. I believed in the vows I took 10 years ago, in sickness and in health, in sacrifice, in love. I did not believe that a man could accept a piece of your living, breathing body and then erase you from his life like a typo in a rough draft. I didn't know that a person could carry your life inside of them and still walk away without a backward glance. But when I woke up that morning, his side of the bed wasn't just empty, it was cold. It felt like a grave. And by noon, so was the trail. My name is Nia, and this is Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. Tonight, I'm telling you how I gave my husband an organ, and he gave me abandonment. Before we start, tell me where you are listening from, your city, your state, your country. Have you ever given everything to someone who treated it like nothing? Tell me your story in the comments. I'm reading every single one. We found out about Nathan's kidney failure on a Tuesday. It was an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday until the world decided to tilt on its axis. He had been tired for months, not just long day at work tired, but a deep, bone-aching exhaustion that seemed to gray his skin from the inside out. He was irritable, snapping at the smallest things, and the skin around his eyes was perpetually swollen, holding on to fluids his body could no longer process. I thought it was stress. I thought he just needed a vacation. He insisted it was nothing at all, just the weight of getting older and the pressure of the firm. Until he collapsed. He was standing in the kitchen, reaching for a glass of water, and he just went down. The sound of his body hitting the linoleum floor is a noise that has been looped in my nightmares ever since. It was a heavy, hollow thud, the sound of a foundation crumbling. The hospital lights were too bright, an aggressive, artificial white that stripped away all comfort and left us exposed in our most vulnerable moment. The machines in the ICU beeped with a steady, cruel indifference, counting down the seconds of a life that was suddenly hanging by a very thin thread. The doctor's voice was calm, that practiced, professional calm that feels like a cold slap when your heart is racing. "End-stage renal failure," he said. The words didn't make sense to me. Nathan ran 5Ks. Nathan was the strongest man I knew. But suddenly, his body was a prison. Dialysis started immediately, 3 times a week, 4-hour sessions where I sat in a hard plastic chair, watching his blood leave his body, travel through a plastic tube, and return again, filtered by a machine because his own organs had quit on him. He could barely climb the stairs without stopping to gasp for air. His world had shrunk to the size of a hospital bed, and mine had shrunk right along with it. People at the clinic whispered that I was a strong woman. They didn't see me in the car afterward, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, begging God to take my health if it meant saving his. I spent every night researching, praying, and watching him fade. I was terrified that if I blinked, he would vanish. I didn't realize that the man I was trying so hard to save was already preparing to leave me behind the moment he felt strong enough to walk. When the doctors finally sat us down to discuss the reality of the transplant list, my heart didn't sink. It hardened with resolve. They explained the statistics, the years of waiting, the agonizing uncertainty of finding a deceased donor. I didn't need to hear the numbers. I didn't need a week to pray or a council of advisors to weigh the risks. I walked straight to the transplant coordinator's office before we even left the building. I remember the scent of that office, stale coffee and industrial-grade lavender, and the way the coordinator, a woman with weary but kind eyes, looked at me over her spectacles. "It's a major surgery, Naya," she warned. "You have 2 kidneys, yes, but giving one away changes your life forever. There is no undoing this." I didn't care about forever. I only cared about Nathan's now. I remember the sharp, cold bite of the first needle as they began the compatibility testing. I watched my blood fill the vials, thinking, this is the bridge. This is how I bring him back to me. The testing was an exhausting marathon. Cross-matching, tissue typing, psychological evaluations. Every day I spent in those white-walled rooms was a day Nathan spent tethered to a dialysis machine, his strength leaking out of him in 4-hour increments. Then came the phone call. I was in the kitchen, staring at the spot where he had collapsed weeks before, when the coordinator told me the news. "It's a miracle match, Naya. Your HLA markers, your blood type, it's as if you were biological siblings. We almost never see this kind of compatibility in a spouse." I remember running into the living room, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. Nathan was huddled under a blanket, looking so small in his favorite armchair. When I told him, he didn't cheer, he didn't celebrate. He just sat there, and then he began to sob, a deep, jagged sound that seemed to come from his very soul. He kept saying, "You don't have to do this. I can't ask this of you." And I remember kneeling on the floor, taking his cold hands in mine and looking him dead in the eye. "You aren't asking," I whispered. "I am giving, because I can't live in a world where you aren't whole." The day of the surgery, the hospital felt like a tomb made of glass and steel. I remember the scratchy texture of the hospital gown and the way the air conditioning felt like ice on my bare skin. As they wheeled our gurneys toward the operating suite, we were positioned side by side for one brief moment. Nathan reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. "I'll see you on the other side," he mouthed. I smiled, a fierce, protective love burning in my chest. I thought we were becoming one in a way that defied nature. I thought I was sowing a seed of life that would bloom into a golden future for us. I didn't realize I was merely a donor to a man who saw our marriage as a debt he was finally ready to settle. The first week back at the house felt like a victory lap for our marriage. Nathan was attentive, almost overwhelmingly so. He would shuffle into the kitchen to make me tea, moving with the newfound energy that my own body lacked. He would help me to the bathroom, his hand firm and steady under my elbow, whispering words of gratitude that felt like a soothing balm on my raw spirit. We were a miracle story. We were the couple that had stared down death and won. But as the 3rd week approached, the atmosphere in our home began to curdle. It wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow, creeping frost that started in the corners of the rooms and eventually reached our bed. Nathan began to heal at a rate that surpassed the doctor's expectations. The kidney, my kidney, was working perfectly inside of him, filtering out the toxins that had once threatened to end his life. But as his physical strength returned, his emotional presence vanished. He started guarding his phone with a sharp, jagged intensity I had never seen before. For 10 years, our phones had sat on the nightstand like open books, but now his was always face down, always within reach, and always locked behind a new code he hadn't shared. He began taking work calls in the backyard, pacing along the fence line in the dark, his voice a low, rhythmic murmur that died the moment I opened the back door. I would watch him through the kitchen window, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight, looking like a man I had never met. The man who had cried on my shoulder in the hospital was being replaced by a stranger with the clinical, detached politeness. He started showering twice a day, grooming himself with a precision that felt out of place for someone still technically in recovery. He would sit across from me at the dinner table, his eyes fixed on his screen, a small, secret smile playing on his lips that had nothing to do with me. When I would find the courage to ask who he was talking to, his face would go flat, his eyes turning into cold, dark marbles. "You're imagining things, Nia," he would say, his voice devoid of the warmth it held just days before. "You're on heavy pain medication, you're tired, you're being paranoid. Maybe you should go lie down." He used my own recovery as a weapon against me. He made me feel like the trauma of the surgery had fractured my mind, rather than my instincts being sharpened by the betrayal. Love has a way of honing your senses. I could feel the shift in the air, the way he would recoil slightly if my hand brushed his, the way he stopped looking me in the eye when he thanked me. It is a haunting, hollow sensation to realize that a literal part of your living body is keeping someone alive while they are mentally and spiritually plotting your exit. I was still clutching my side, the incision red and angry, while he was already stretching his legs, preparing to run into a life I wasn't invited to. I thought we were merging into one. I didn't realize he was just using me as a refueling station before leaving for his final destination. The morning Nathan left, the light in our bedroom was a pale, sickly yellow, filtered through the heavy curtains I hadn't yet found the strength to open. I remember waking up not to the sound of his voice or the smell of coffee, but to a sound that felt like a serrated blade cutting through the silence, the sharp, definitive rasp of a zipper. It was the sound of a suitcase being closed with a finality that made my blood run cold even before I opened my eyes. I was still in that heavy, post-surgical fog, my body feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, every nerve ending in my abdomen humming with a dull, throbbing ache that reminded me of what I had lost. I rolled over, a groan escaping my lips, and saw him standing by the closet. He wasn't in his pajamas or the comfortable sweats he had lived in since the transplant. He was fully dressed in a crisp, button-down shirt and his favorite pair of dark denim. He looked healthy. He looked vibrant. He looked like a man who was ready to conquer the world, while I looked like a woman who had been hollowed out. Because I had been. I had literally given up a piece of myself so he could stand that tall. "I'm just going to pick up my prescription at the pharmacy," he said, his voice light and casual, as if he were talking about the weather rather than a life-altering departure. "And I might stop by the office for an hour just to check on a few files. I'm taking my overnight bag because I might drop some clothes off at the dry cleaners on the way." It was a mountain of small, calculated lies, stacked one on top of the other, but in my weakened state, I didn't have the strength to climb them. I lay there, clutching the duvet to my chest, watching him move with a grace and speed that my own kidney had afforded him. He walked over to the bed and kissed my forehead. It was a cold, dry kiss, the kind of perfunctory gesture you give a distant relative at a funeral. "Rest, Naya. You've done enough," he whispered. Those 4 words, "you've done enough," should have been a comfort. They should have been a badge of honor. Instead, they felt like a closing argument. I didn't realize then that he meant the transaction was complete. I had served my purpose. I had given him the organ he needed to survive, and now that his blood was clean and his energy was back, he no longer had a use for the woman who had provided it. By noon, the silence in the house began to feel heavy, almost physical. It was a silence that had a weight to it, pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. I called his cell phone, but it went straight to a generic voicemail, not even his own voice, just a digital recording telling me he was unavailable. By 3 o'clock, the pharmacy trip had stretched past the point of reason. I dragged myself out of bed, my side screaming with every movement, and shuffled toward the closet. The door was ajar. I looked inside and felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. His favorite suits, the ones he wore for special occasions, were gone. The shelf where he kept his passport was empty. The space where his overnight bag had sat was a haunting, dusty void. I sat on the floor of the closet, the smell of his cologne still clinging to the fabric of my own dresses, and I felt a panic so sharp it felt like I was being cut open all over again without anesthesia. By midnight, as I sat in the living room with only the blue, flickering light of the television for company, the truth finally began to settle in my bones. He wasn't in an accident. He wasn't delayed at work. He had taken the life I gave him, and he had walked out the door with it. I looked down at the bandages on my abdomen, the quiet, jagged reminder of my sacrifice, and for the first time, I felt the cold, echoing terror of being truly alone. He didn't leave. He vanished into a life he had been building while I was still on the operating table, leaving me to heal in the wreckage of a house that was no longer a home. The 3 days following his disappearance were a blur of cold tea, unanswered calls, and a physical pain that seemed to intensify with every hour of silence. I sat on the sofa, clutching a heating pad to my side, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun. I had called the hospitals. I had called the police. I had even called his mother, who sounded strangely distant, as if she were reading from the script she hadn't quite memorized. I was still waiting for the accident explanation. I was still waiting for the version of the story where he was the victim and I was the worried wife. The reality didn't arrive with a phone call or a knock on the door. It arrived with a sharp digital chirp at 2 p.m. on a Friday. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, and for a split second, my heart leaped. I thought it was him. I thought it was the "I'm sorry" I had been rehearsing in my head. But the number was unknown. I swiped open the message, and the world stopped spinning. "Please stop calling him," the text read. "He's with me now. He needs peace to heal. He needs to move forward, and he can't do that with you constantly pulling him back into the past." I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I thought I would faint. "He's with me now." The words felt like physical blows landing right on the site of my surgery. I dropped the phone on the rug, my breath hitching in a chest that felt like it was filled with broken glass. He hadn't just left. He hadn't just gotten overwhelmed by the weight of the transplant. He had walked straight out of my hospital room and into the arms of someone else. The cruelty of the timing was what broke me. I was still wearing the surgical stockings. I was still taking the anti-rejection adjacent medications to ensure my body didn't go into shock. I was still sleeping upright because lying flat felt like my remaining kidney was being squeezed by a vice. While I was struggling to put on my own socks, he was healing in the presence of another woman. I looked at the kitchen table where we had sat just a month ago, crying over the diagnosis. I thought of the way he had whispered, "I love you," as the anesthesia took hold. It was all a performance. Every tear, every moment of gratitude, every miracle we celebrated, it was just a bridge he used to get from a dying body to a new one. I had literally given him an organ, a piece of my own flesh and blood, and he had used it as a getaway car. He didn't just give me abandonment, he gave me a level of betrayal that felt like it was written into my very DNA. A week after that text message, the shock began to harden into a cold, hollowed-out clarity. I was no longer a woman waiting for her husband to come home. I was a woman living in a crime scene where the only thing stolen was my future. I needed to know. I needed to see the mechanics of how a human heart could be so calculated. I dragged myself to the guest room where Nathan had kept his workstation. He had taken his laptop, but he had forgotten the shared tablet we used for streaming and reading. My fingers trembled as I powered it on. I expected to find nothing. He was a man of details, a man of finance and precision. But he had grown arrogant. He believed I was too weak, too on meds, too broken to ever look. I found the messages in a hidden folder, archived but not erased. They didn't start after the transplant. They didn't even start after the diagnosis. They went back nearly a year. The woman's name was Sarah. As I scrolled, the timeline of my life began to rewrite itself in the most painful way possible. While I was holding his hand during his first dialysis session, he was texting her about the suffocating weight of my pity. While I was crying in the hospital chapel, begging for a match, he was sending her photos of the half-life he was forced to live with me. But the message that truly broke the last of my spirit was dated just 3 days before our surgery. "The match is confirmed," Nathan had written. "She's going through with it. Once I get better, once I have the strength to stand on my own 2 feet, I'm leaving. I can't live this half-life anymore. Just wait for me. I'm getting my life back, and then I'm coming to you." Half-life. That was the term he used for our decade of marriage. The years of building a home, the Christmases, the struggles, the quiet mornings. It was all just a half-life he was enduring until he could find a way out. My sacrifice wasn't an act of love to him. It was a transaction. I was a biological spare part. I was the bridge he needed to cross to get to her. He didn't just accept my kidney. He stole it under false pretenses. He let me go under the knife, let me risk my life, and let me hollow out my own body, all while knowing that the very strength I was giving him would be used to walk away from me. The kidney I gave him, the one that was currently filtering his blood and keeping his heart beating, was the very thing that freed him to betray me. I sat on the floor of that dark room, the tablet glowing like a radioactive coal in my lap, and I realized that I hadn't saved a man. I had fueled a monster. 2 months passed in a blur of gray mornings and heavy, silent afternoons. I had stopped calling. I had stopped the frantic late-night texting that always went into the void. I had even stopped checking the tablet, eventually throwing it into the back of a closet because the glow of those messages felt like it was burning my eyes. I was learning to live in the silence. I was learning the geography of my new body, the way it felt to move with a missing piece, the way the scar had turned from a jagged red line into a silvery, puckered reminder of a woman who no longer existed. I thought I was through the worst of it. I thought the abandonment was the final chapter. I had even started looking for a smaller place, somewhere that didn't smell like his cologne or the lilies that had long since rotted in their vases. But then, on a rainy Tuesday night, exactly 3 months since the surgery, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway, my voice thin and guarded. There was a long silence on the other end, just the sound of ragged, heavy breathing that made the hair on my arm stand up. "Naya?" The voice was weak. It was thin, reedy, and lacked the vibrant strength I had seen on the morning he vanished. It was the voice of the man who had collapsed in my kitchen, not the man who had walked out of my life. My heart didn't leap with joy. It sank with a heavy, familiar dread. "Nathan," I said, my voice as cold as the rain hitting the window. "I'm not doing well," he whispered. I could hear the background noise of a hospital, the rhythmic hiss-click of an oxygen machine, the distant chime of a call button. "The transplant, it's failing, Naya. My body, it's rejecting it. The doctors say it's an acute rejection. They can't stabilize it." I sat there in the dark, the phone pressed so hard against my ear that it hurt. My kidney, The piece of me that I had nurtured, the organ that had been healthy and strong inside my own body for 30 years. My body had trusted him with it. My blood had flowed through it to keep him alive. And now, his body was fighting it. His system was treating a part of me like an invading enemy. "The woman," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "The one you needed peace to heal with. Where is she?" There was a long, shaky exhale. "She's gone, Naya. She couldn't handle the hospital. She didn't sign up for this. I need you, please. You're the only one who knows the history. You're the only one who can talk to the specialists. I'm scared." He was scared. He was reaching out for the half-life he so desperately fled. He wanted the comfort of my pity, the warmth of my sacrifice, and the strength of a woman he treated like a biological grocery store. In that moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a flare of anger. It wasn't a desire for revenge. It was something much more powerful. It was clarity. I realized that my kidney wasn't failing him. He was failing the kidney. He was failing the gift because he was never worthy of the giver. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't speed through red lights or feel the frantic heart-and-throat panic that had defined the day of his collapse. Instead, I moved with a slow, deliberate grace. I dressed in a sweater that felt soft against my skin. I made sure the house was locked, and I drove the familiar route to the medical center in a silence that was finally peaceful. I wasn't going there because I loved him with the same blind, sacrificial fire. I wasn't going there to be the strong wife for the benefit of the nurses or the church members. I was going because I needed to look the truth in the eye. I needed to see the man who had stolen a part of me, and I needed to see him in the light of day. The room was the same antiseptic smell, the same blue-tinted shadows, the same rhythmic whoosh of the ventilation system. But Nathan looked different. He looked smaller, as if the lies had kept him inflated, and now that they were gone, he was slowly collapsing into himself. His skin had returned to that sallow, grayish-yellow hue I remembered from the first diagnosis. He looked fragile, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, roaming the room until they finally landed on me. "You came," he whispered, a tear tracking a slow path through the stubble on his cheek. I stood at the foot of his bed, my coat still on, my purse still looped over my arm. I didn't sit down. I didn't reach for his hand. I just watched him. "I came to see my kidney, Nathan. I didn't come to see you." "She left me, Nia," he admitted, his voice cracking with a pathetic, self-pitying edge. "As soon as the labs came back bad, as soon as I couldn't get out of bed, she just stopped answering. She said she couldn't handle the energy of a sick room. She couldn't handle the reality." I almost laughed. Of course she couldn't. She had fallen in love with the man I had rebuilt with my own flesh. She wanted the version of him that was strong, vibrant, and free of debt. She didn't want the man who actually belonged to the struggle. She didn't want the man who required a sacrifice. She was just like him, a consumer of people, a seeker of the easy half-life. "You saved me," he said, reaching out a trembling hand toward me, his eyes begging for the old Nia to return. "You're the only one who ever truly loved me. Please, tell them to try the new treatment. Tell them I'll do anything to stay here with you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt something unexpected. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't the searing fire of a woman scorned. It was distance. It was the realization that he was a stranger who happened to be carrying my property. "No, Nathan," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "I didn't save you. I saved myself. I learned that I am a woman who can survive being hollowed out. I learned that I can give everything and still have enough left over to stand on my own 2 feet. Your body is rejecting that kidney because it knows it doesn't belong in a house built on lies. It's trying to come home, but it has nowhere to go. I turned toward the door, the sound of my own footsteps firm and rhythmic against the hospital floor. You disappeared the moment you took that organ, Nathan. You revealed who you were. And as it turns out, losing you was the surgery I didn't know I needed. I still have the scar. It runs like a quiet, silvery reminder across my abdomen, a jagged map of a journey I never asked to take. People see it sometimes, at the beach or when I'm changing for a yoga class, and they assume it's from something tragic, and they're right, but not in the way they think. They think the tragedy is the missing organ. They think the tragedy is the physical wound. But the real tragedy was the decade I spent believing that my worth was tied to how much of myself I could give away to a man who didn't even see me. I gave my husband a kidney. He gave me a betrayal that should have destroyed me, and somehow in the wreckage, I survived both. The house no longer smells like antiseptic and lilies. It smells like lavender now. It smells like fresh rain and the coffee I make just for myself. It smells like a woman who is finally healing from the inside out. He disappeared. He chose the shadows, but I did not. If you are listening to this and you are in a place where your sacrifice is being treated like a chore, if you are giving your life to someone who is only looking for an exit, I want you to hear me. Never regret the love you gave. That love belongs to you. It is a testament to your strength, not their lack of it. Regret only the silence you kept for someone who was never worthy of your voice. I may have lost a kidney, but I found my freedom, and that was the transplant I truly needed. This has been Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. Thank you for listening. Tell me your story in the comments. Let's heal together. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.